how did you get to where you are?
Yeah. Well, there's certainly been circus in my background, not a literal circus, but I think as any of us who've been involved in BAM, it's never a straight line. I don't think I've yet to talk to anybody who experience has been just like, and I followed that path, and it was exactly as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
Um,
A lot of
so
zig, a lot of zag. Yeah.
yeah, I came on mission trips to Peru, and I felt immediately like it wasn't for me. So that's not what anyone expects to hear, right? At this point, I came back from my first trip and I said, I don't think I'm ever going back to Peru. Literally, I just said, I'm going to keep doing business and I'll support missions, but I don't need to go. Um, Only to then a few weeks later be approached by one of the elders who had led the team that year, who said, I think you're the perfect person to lead this team next year. And so I had this conflict, right? I was like, I didn't even think I was going. And he's asking me to lead the team. I said, all right, well, I'll pray about it. But in my mind, I was like, that's not happening. But the Lord just convinced me otherwise. That's the only way I can put it, because honestly, it was not my intention to ever return. Um, I had gone on my trip. I didn't dislike it, but I just didn't know that, it felt like the best use of my time. I was looking at it purely as a business person. And I was like, I can make more money in the United States to support more people doing what I'm doing. Why do I need to go? You know what I mean? And like that, it was just a calculation in my mind at that point still.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I didn't value mission. I did. I was just looking at it from a purely numbers crunching aspect in my head.
That's a
Um,
fairly consistent rationalization.
yeah,
You're certainly not the only one that's ever gone through that process of thinking, I'll make my money here and I'll be generous and that'll be great. And that's fine. There's nothing for those that God calls to that. That's exactly what they should do. But God somehow says, no, that's not what I'm asking you to do.
I completely agree with you. And I think we need lots of those people. And I think what I'm hoping to do now, what I feel like the Lord has kind of brought me here to do, which we'll get to through this whole thing, is, you know, help people here build that mentality, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to do my business and I'm going to be the one who supports ministry and mission, because the Lord has blessed me. And that was the mentality. I was clearly in that. And I thought, but the Lord convinced me otherwise. And in the moment he didn't say, go be a missionary, that wasn't it. He just said, yeah, you could lead this trip. Because I clearly, in my entrepreneurial and business background, I have leadership skills, and that wasn't,
Yeah.
it was noted by, so I said, okay, yeah, I can do that. I think the Lord is telling me I should do that. So I did for a few years. And after a few of those trips, I came to the conclusion after the third or fourth time leading that the Lord was telling me I was actually supposed to go and be a missionary.
Hmm.
And now is when it got really confusing, because I was like, okay, now I don't understand, because it was one thing to say I can sacrifice a couple weeks and go away. And now I had just started a second business. And I was like, I don't understand what you're doing to me, God. This doesn't seem like at all the path I thought I was going on. Right. But in the next few years, there were a lot of life events that happened. I had lost my little brother in a car accident right after that happened. And that again threw me for a wrench. And I think all of these things were just the Lord preparing me for like being more dependent on him, especially I think, as men and as entrepreneurs, if we've had any success at all, we can get a little, kind of dependent on ourselves, you know? And so I think that through this period of time, it was him just kind of showing me, you know, you don't have to depend on yourself. Yes, do good things and do all that you can do with your own abilities, but you don't have to depend on yourself, you know?
Yeah.
And so in preparation to come to the field, because I can tell you, if you come onto the field thinking that you're the one who's going to make anything happen, you're going to leave very disappointed, you know?
Yeah.
What we can accomplish it. And I think most of us go on the field with higher expectations than we probably should. And there's not time for me to get into that whole probably this concept and thought, but um, again, as a business person, I think we can put just high expectations on anything that we expect to accomplish because we have planned, but anyone who's been on the field can tell you that life does not follow our plans on the field at all. People take a long time to come around to you. Relationships are not things that happen overnight. And if people don't trust you and you don't have relationships that really matter, it's very hard to make inroads in these places as a foreigner.
Yeah.
And it's understandable. Now that I've lived here so long, I look back on it and I go, of course they don't trust me. I mean, look at their recent history. They literally were, invaded by a foreign country, and those people, took over everything multiple times, and then they forced a twisted version of their own religion on them just to control them more, and everything was taken from them. And they continue to have a lot of their resources and other things taken from them by foreign entities, in a manipulative way. I'm not trying to get political or anything. I'm just talking
No, it's true. It's
what
history.
happens in most of these places, And so why would they look at me and say, oh yeah, that guy's here to help me? It's going to take them a while to come around to that conclusion,
Yeah.
I have to demonstrate over and over again that genuinely that's what I'm here for, So anyways, that's a long version of another part of it. But I got to this point then where I was like, okay, so I am going on to go become a missionary. I don't really think I'm a pastor. Like, is that really what I'm supposed to do? And at this point, this was 2005 and 6, 7, right around there. So, you've been in this, world a long time. There was very little publicity around resources.
Yeah.
The internet wasn't quite what it is now anyways. It was still much, it still existed, obviously, but it wasn't like full of, searches you could find on BAM stuff. There just wasn't much out there.
We refer to it as the Wild Wild West in the West.
Yeah. And if you don't know what business as mission or BAM is, you don't know how to even look for it, right? It's like, because it hadn't been named a thing. It was just starting to happen in the sea place. I mean, it had been happening always, obviously, but in a formalized, organized, named kind of movement, there just wasn't anything behind it. And so I just didn't know. So I started taking some seminary classes and trying to figure it all out. And then I think for me, I ended up at the Global Missions Conference for the PCA. That's the denomination that I came from to here, out of the PCA church in Virginia, and sat in on a session that the Chalmers Center was doing with Dr. Brian Fickert, and started hearing a lot of what he was talking about. And I was like, okay, that is right up my alley. That's the sort of stuff that gets me excited, And then out of that, I started understanding and finding more things about this whole concept. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not supposed to be a pastor. Now, I love my pastor at the time. He's a dear, dear brother. God rest his soul. He just passed away last February. But he didn't have any idea about what business was either, because it was new, and so he had a lot of hesitation. He was not with me going to become a missionary, but he was just like, it wasn't something he understood,
Yeah.
And
very common story, by the way. Very common.
Yeah. And in his mind, if you're a PCA member, you join the MTW, which is their, international sending organization, and you go and you do something that MTW does. Well, at that point, the MTW literally had just put a director of business as missions in place near the end of when I started to figure this all out. But he was like one guy for the entire world.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to come to Peru to work under a pastor here in Peru who I knew. I had attended his church off and on whenever I was in Lima. And I knew him very well. We had talked about it. And I knew that it wasn't what he wanted. It didn't make sense for him because he's a pastor who's trying to train leaders and pastors and and shepherd a church, right? And he didn't understand business. And so there was just all this. It was like you understand, and many people have sure had this experience. It was not an easy thing to do. But because I'm an entrepreneur, my idea was like, okay, well, I'll do my own thing, right? If you don't find someone who's doing it the way that it makes sense, like I didn't want to do my own thing because I knew this was going to be hard. But at the same time, I said, no one's doing this in the way that I think the Lord wants me to do it, and I didn't want to come here and be a burden on this pastor in Lima. Like, to me, that didn't make sense. Like I said, it's clearly, I talked to him multiple times about it, and it just was very evident to me that he did not want to really have me do that. And so, I started meeting with some other business people who I knew were also passionate about missions. And we met kind of monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, depending on everybody's availability, for a couple of years. And eventually we formed an organization and we created what is now our nonprofit side into global initiatives. And it just sort of came out with this vision that we wanted ministry to be expanded and supported through locals, and by locals, like in their country by them. Like, and how could we come alongside that? The way we've done that has also followed this winding path over the years. I told you where we ended up. In the beginning, we started a coffee shop in the mountains to support an orphanage. And the Lord kind of closed the door on that project, and it's been through a number of different kind of versions along the way, but they've all always had that same vision of seeing God's kingdom expand and to see that expansion happen through the support of locals, especially local business people. And so that's where we've ended up becoming this kind of catalyst, built our capacity building organization to kind of raise up business people who understand that responsibility, and also improving their own, lot in life as a result of this capacity building.